Hello, internet friends. I'm going to talk a bit today about most of the things that I've been kind of rambling on about online lately, but basically my two biggest causes for concern in the Canadian real estate, or I guess the GTA real estate market right now. I'm not really super familiar with the Canadian context. I just want to try and acknowledge the risk that's going on. And seem to be better at just sort of aggregating and kind of coming up with micro sentiment rather than macro. I think the macro environment, I mean, there's enough guys really covering it well out there. Take a look at Steve Saretsky, Ben Rapidu, etc. On the micro side, I mean, there's a couple of things where I've sort of been able to find data that alludes to a couple of different phenomena happening. So the first thing I want to talk about is UBS's real estate bubble index, in which Canada is ranked, or Toronto is ranked in third place. Vancouver actually is no longer considered at bubble risk. But Toronto actually did move down one spot. We were in second place last year. Now we're in third place. But the metrics actually moved up. So I'm going to talk about that and the UBS report. I'm going to talk about the condo market because we just got end of September stats for condo rentals, and it looks like we're kind of seeing the rental market soften a little bit, and then a lot of that stuff's kind of easing its way into the resale market. And so I want to talk a little bit about that, and then I'm going to ramble on a little bit further about the cottage country, my fear, and sort of some of the research that I'm planning on doing with a couple of other realtors around cottage country, and the risk of a liquidity trap that we could see happening there. So anyway, I'm going to be on the iPad a lot. This will be like my first kind of like solo YouTube video, so it's probably going to be all over the place, but I'm sure I'll get it refined over time. First 8 to 10 minutes I'll put on IGTV, and the remainder will just be available on YouTube. My YouTube is just Daniel Foch. Just search it up. And there's a link in my Insta bio, dfoch.ca. You can find all my stuff there. So I'm just going to pull up the kind of pertinent charts here. Basically, there's a map here that summarizes all of the areas on the globe that are sort of in bubble territory. Toronto, I think we got Paris, Frankfurt, and Munich are the two bubbles, or places that are at a higher risk of bubble than Toronto, and then Toronto would be coming in at number 3. So they basically measure out, this here is the bubble index, which is basically function of how good quality the investment is. So, and I'll get to this later because it's in the report, but so how long, basically a reverse cap rate, so how long would it take you to pay off a unit if you bought it, and also the function of how detached it is from income. So as an example, if the prices can't be substantiated by the employment that you can have within that city. So Toronto, again, ranking pretty high, but quite a bit lower than the two German counterparts. Not that that's anything to be writing home about, but I just want to get an understanding, or give an understanding as to why. So, and I did try and do a little bit of this in my Insta stories, but it's hard to write this out properly. So one of the things that they talk about here, on this page in the report, and just DM me if you want the report, but is that there's the lack of a cyclical nature. Like we haven't really seen a long-term credit cycle. We haven't really seen a long-term demand cycle because we're such a young market, and this is our first crack at sort of being one of those like global cities. Like we did it before with Montreal. It was kind of like the New York's playground. But Toronto really just trying to take a stab at being this baby New York that a lot of people are referring to it as, and all places that attract migration in the world ultimately go through these cycles, and whether or not COVID is going to be the exogenous shock that ends up catalyzing the tail end of one of those cycles, or sorry, the beginning of one of those cycles? I don't know. I don't think anybody really knows. Anybody who tells you that they know is like totally full of it. So I think that, but I do think that basically we've, it's, you can look at how Canada has grown in the past versus, let's say, the U.S., and these are the leading markets in the U.S. here on this chart. So you have New York, L.A., San Fran, Chicago, and Boston. And then you just have Vancouver and Toronto here. And again, you're not really seeing this cyclical nature, which it doesn't allow for the market to be healthy. I mean, and when we have seen cycles in Canada, they've been as a result of an exogenous shock or like pullbacks or corrections, such as like the foreign home ownership tax, and then it basically just ends up like taking capital and porting it all around the country, right? So Vancouver put their foreign ownership tax in, and then Toronto blew up, and then Toronto put their foreign ownership tax in, and the detached market went or just dropped. The bottom came out of it in the Greater Golden Horseshoe, like 30% correction in some areas, and then all of that capital from the Greater Golden Horseshoe ended up getting ported to smaller cities within Ontario. So like, then you saw, and it's still kind of going right now, and even more so because of COVID and this urban exodus phenomena that we're seeing. But basically, your Kitchener, Waterloo, London, Kingston, Ottawa, like all of those markets have just gone crazy. So again, it's like you're starting to see this. It's just like this unstoppability, and this is what would happen in an infant market, or in a market that is in its infancy. Like in Europe, this would have happened to markets, when in like 100 years ago, and or if you were to look at the U.S. when these markets were first taking off. So the question is, at what point is Toronto going to sort of reach its maturity as a market, or Toronto or Canada in general going to reach its maturity as a market? And I mean, there is a really compelling possibility that it could perpetuate forever, because we have a very good brand of freedom. We have a good British Imperial Land Registry system. I mean, there are a lot of reasons, especially as the world seems to be going in all these different strange directions politically. There are a lot of reasons that people would feel compelled to move to Canada. So there is sort of that piece that could continue driving this sort of stocks only go up phenomena that we're seeing with Canadian housing. But on the micro side, and I'll get to this when I talk about condos, I think that we will continue to see some of these micro fluctuations and corrections, and I would argue that probably condos are next in line, and whether or not that has some major downward pressure on the market is yet to be determined. But I can get into that a little bit. So there is so here they talk about price to income, and on this graph, Toronto actually doesn't perform too poorly. So we're like sort of in the lower half, let's say, by comparison to all of these bubble cities that we're seeing in this report. And then when you get to price to rent, Toronto is in the upper 50%, and this is basically a function of just cap rate compression, excess demand for real estate. So basically, like even though income is really good by comparison to values in Canada, when you compare it to some of these other, let's say global hubs or whatever cities that are on this list, but when you compare to when you compare the rent that you can earn as an investor if you're buying a property in this area, that's when it becomes a little bit more challenging. I'm just gonna shake my mouse here. I'm new to this whole video thing. Okay. So yeah, that sort of concludes. I think they do a little bit of a micro analysis on Toronto here as well. Beside Munich, I believe. There's Van, Tokyo, LA, Stockholm. I might have missed it. So I posted it on my Twitter anyway. I'm going to go through a bunch of tweets next. Here. So basically what this looks at is annual house price growth rates. So again, you can really visualize the sort of coming off that you're seeing in 2017. And then sort of returning back to sort of your normal. And then they have the development of sub-indexes, so change in mortgage to GDP. So they have like all of these sub-indexes that they use to evaluate the health of a market. I mean, basically the growth of those is sort of what they use to establish that they believe Toronto is moving into bubble territory. So next I am going to, let me see here, and pull up some stuff from Twitter in regards to this condo phenomenon that's going on. So I've worked with a couple of people producing charts for evaluating the condo market in Toronto. So the one is Better Dwelling. Stephen Penwasi, basically looking at, so Stephen actually like just linearized these graphs and I just started copying that. But basically, now we're starting to see in the condo market. So this is your condo leases per month versus condo rental listings per month. So you can see again, very cyclical in nature over time, and then basically things start to get a little bit disrupted during the COVID lockdown, and then after that they sort of skyrocket on the supply side, and then we saw the demand side sort of catch up as well. So demand did start to peak, and a lot of it was probably, again, you're seeing a lot of people exiting and moving into a new unit just to save themselves, $1 or $2, or a couple hundred, I guess. And then now again we're starting to see supply correct, but you're also seeing the demand correct almost at a rate that appears to be more aggressive than the supply. So less leases and still historically high listings. And this is listings per month, so this isn't even active. So basically if supply starts coming off if demand starts coming off and supply stays the same and continues at a high rate, which it appears that it will, it's only a matter of time until you start to see this appear in the resale market. So that's what I sort of looked at next. And essentially, when you look at it in the resale market, the question is whether or not these are beginning to appear in the resale market. And the answer to that question, as I determined, is yes. So if you look at basically, so the gray line, the top line, I guess, towards the end here, is the rental listings, condo rental listings. And then the darker line, the black line, is the condo resale listings. So again, as the supply starts to decline, you're starting to see, so to me it looks like a lot of these rentals that are having a very, very slow absorption, historically slow absorption, and increasing vacancy rate, as we start to see that supply decline, or that supply rate decline, your resale supply rate is increasing. So essentially, I mean, and most of the guys who, when I posted this on Twitter, I mean, you can even see it here, looks like rental is going to resale. Yeah, I mean, I think that's sort of the logical thing. The question then becomes, how competitive is price discovery going to get on the resale side of things? So, and then I'll visualize this in a couple of other ways as well. So this is the chart that I prepared for Ben, and basically it's a more annualized, so it's not linear, but basically you can see the cyclical nature of the rental market, and then basically just boom, out of nowhere, out of somewhere, out of COVID, rental listings just skyrocket. And now again, you're starting to see some exhaustion. This is where it gets interesting. If you look at that same chart for sale or resale listings, and this is where you have to wonder whether or not it's something to do with the ability for condo boards to regulate showings in condo buildings during COVID. But basically, again, you can see a pretty cyclical nature in the red lines, and then basically the black line as lockdown starts, listings basically taper off completely, and then they shoot up. And this is what, from my perspective, looks like, we hear a lot of talk about pent up demand, but this to me is the most compelling case that I've seen for pent up supply. So again, I talk a lot about sort of how condos could impact the broader market if we do start to see prices come off on condos. And the big one is that basically, it's an exchangeable product, or it plays a role in the step up from so like, let's say, somebody from my generation, which is very common, they're selling a condo to buy a house in the suburbs, maybe if they're starting a family, or selling 2 condos and merging households or whatever. So if we start to see new household formation slow, which it appears that it is, and maybe even declining because a lot of people are moving home back in with their parents because it doesn't make economic sense to live in the city right now. If we continue to see that trend, then it wouldn't surprise me if condo values compressed a lot from where they are. There is a little bit of a buffer on top of the condo market, which is this like froth, as people call it, which is basically, in 2017, you saw this as well. Properties were selling for, let's say, 20 to 30% more than they were actually worth, because you're basically buying an options contract, right? So a builder would sell you the unit and say, and your own investment thesis would say, I think this property will be worth 1.3 million when it closes, so I'm willing to pay 1.2 million and I get to make an extra 100K or whatever. You're seeing the same phenomenon, and that's one of the big things that kind of broke 2017 detached. I guess we didn't learn that much from it, but you're starting to see the same thing happen in condos. The bigger challenge with condos is that they're so highly homogenous that if prices do start to fall, it's really easy, like in a race to the bottom environment, because basically, one comp in the whole building takes the per square foot value down, and you have the same unit 100 or like over 50 floors, right? So it's the high homogeneity of the unit type can pull quickly, a lot quicker. Then the question becomes, how does this impact the broader market, like the whole GTA? Will it pull housing prices down? I would say that the condo product in itself has a lot of, it plays a big role in the regional price floor. So if you're looking at Toronto, or if you're a working professional in the GTA, sometimes, like I've seen it, a lot of buyers who are like, trying to decide between, do I buy a condo on the subway line, or do I buy a house up in, or like a condo town in like Newmarket where I can jump on the GO train, walk to the GO train or whatever, or Bradford, and so again, a lot of that becomes a qualitative or like lifestyle decision, but a lot of that, that also can happen based on price. It's like, okay, well, I can pay more for a condo because I don't need the car, and blah blah blah, and so again, if the balance of that mental exchanging, or that trade-off, that economic trade-off that people are doing, if the balance of that gets upset, that can actually start putting negative pressure on the price floor, which could bring down values everywhere. The one thing that I would say we do have protecting us in the GTA is that construction costs inflation is crazy right now, and that's sort of the hedge that's built in, that houses, they can't really go down in value that much until construction costs become deflationary. And if that happens, then that's when it gets scary. And that could, the circumstance under which that could happen is if we see basically condos just pausing, stopping completion, projects failing, projects delaying, or just demand tapering off completely. If there's fewer units, then fewer units in the pipeline, lower demand for trades. All of a sudden, these guys can't charge whatever the hell they want to build projects, and now the labor cost in construction starts to decline. That's where the construction side of things, that hedge that's built in, could create a deflationary environment on price. I think that's everything I got to cover on the condo side of things. I'm watching it really closely. It's very important to me to make sure that any of the risk associated with this is super clear to me and to all my clients. So I've been spending a lot of time on that, and these videos are a part of that. Trying to get more and more into video rather than the audio, or sorry, than the writing stuff, because It takes a long time. So I'm going to move on to the cottage piece. I'm just going to change up my phone camera here. And yeah, we'll talk. I already did a cottage one for Instagram, talking a little bit about the cottage bubble. I think I have the charts saved on my, they're pinned on my Twitter if anybody wants to review them in a little bit more detail if it's hard to see on this. But basically, the big thing that I've seen, that the first trend that I identified was this massive break in the cyclical nature of cottage properties. So you're getting this staycation phenomena basically, and cottages worry me a lot. Like, condos is very objective. When you think about condos, it's like, okay, if 80% of the purchasers or 50% of the purchasers are investors and their return starts declining, eventually they're either going to run for the hills or something's going to happen, because it's more of a quantitative understanding. Cottages are a very qualitative thing, and that means that on the purchase side they can end up being a very emotional product. Nothing wrong with that. But it's a qualitative thing. It's about quality of life. And so, again, you have less homogeneity like the condos. So you're basically comparing two extreme ends of the market. And I'm not going to really compare them, but that's sort of the way they would look. The thing is, again, a condo is a highly liquid product because it was, and it probably will continue to be as long as this sort of foreign flight to quality phenomena seems to continue to happen into Canada from a capital perspective. But cottages are historically very illiquid product, and there's no reason why that should change. Like today or since April of this year, it shouldn't change. And it hasn't changed a ton, but it's changed enough that it kind of makes me worry. I have to find the chart in here, but basically the prices have accelerated to the point where, like, this to me is kind of crazy. You sort of see them. They were reaching a historic low, or not a historic low, but I don't know. I mean, cyclical low, just prior to COVID, and then basically lockdown happened, and things just went crazy. Like, they just got like, so you're seeing almost 70, 75 to 100% increase in the average and median sale prices between the beginning and end of this year. Like, it's just obscene, and a lot of this could be selection bias and Treb's data. That's why I'm really trying to get more, like, put more effort into figuring out what's going on here. So I have because Treb doesn't have a ton of waterfront property, rural property, etc. Like, a lot of listings in Muskoka and all that don't really go on Treb, because they have their own local board, real estate board. So there's the Barrie real estate board, there's the and then there would be like a Muskoka real estate board. So I'm going to be working together with an agent on the Barrie board to try and figure out how we can better learn the risk that's associated with the trends that we're seeing in this market right now. But from my perspective, I would say that you're going to see a risk of a lot of these gains being erased. I don't think a lot of these people are buying these cottages as investments so much. Like, I think, again, it's a qualitative purchase, but regardless, there's still downside risk no matter what it is. And I on Instagram, I was comparing it to a jet ski, and Condo Chris on Twitter compares it to a sports car. But these are recreational products, and basically they, when people want them, they're highly liquid, like, right now, jet skis, boats, trailers. Like, you can't get your hands on any of that stuff, and now all of a sudden, like, everybody wants one of those, and cottages are the same thing. But again, and jet ski, boat, trailer, whatever, those all have small payments attached to them, or you're buying them cash. The thing that makes a cottage different is that it's a big debt obligation, and so when you need to liquidate, when it no longer serves its economic purpose, when it's finished its useful economic life to you as the owner of it, and you want to sell it, there's a good chance that that's going to happen at the same time that it for you as it will for 10 other people or 100 other people or 1,000 other people, which is when the world goes back to normal after COVID, you're not going to really want your jet ski. It's just going to be, you're going to see it sitting in your garage costing you money because you can travel again. And so this is where you sort of run into challenges. That when you decide to liquidate, the liquidity or the potential to liquidate is stifled or competed with by the other people who are in the same position as you. And then what happens when you're put in that position is people have to start making compromises. Okay, I'm going to discount my price because I need to sell. I need the money, or I need this mortgage obligation to stop. And as that happens, this is where you start to realize the risk in real time. And my fear is that it could very easily go from, basically, we've seen things go from 60 days on market down to like 30 to 45 days on market. So the speed at which properties are selling, or their liquidity today, is in a place where that it shouldn't be, and it could and so it's easy to go buy something when it's like, oh, cottages are flying off the shelves. Well, yeah, are they going to be when in 2 or 5 years, when you realize that this might not be something that you need forever? And that's the thing that I think people need to be more aware of, is that, again, I think, and maybe there's a lot of people out there who just are in really good financial positions, and again, liquidity does drive the market, but I think it's important to be aware of the risk of that associated with that, and it's a lot easier to stomach the risk of getting yourself into a liquidity trap if it's a jet ski. It becomes harder if it's a cottage that costs you, a lot of money in maintenance every year, taxes, insurance, and your mortgage and capital costs. So yeah, those are, generally, just summarizing, those are sort of the big looming things that I am exploring in the GTA right now, in the Toronto and sort of Ontario real estate market, is the function of cottage country and this excess demand that's moved into cottage country. Probably we'll see how that starts looking in the suburban world as well. As a lot of I am from Keswick. I grew up here, so right on Lake Simcoe. So I'm sort of wedged right in between on the shores of the lake. I get really intimate involvement with that, but I'm also 45 minutes from the city, so I kind of get the whole exposure to your urban to suburban world. And my interest is really just trying to understand how there's a lot of, let's call it, consumer sentiment changes happening in the market right now, and whether or not those are here to stay, or if we're going to return to normal, and how we can use the data that I have, the limited data that I have, and the limited research capability that I have, to figure out whether or not there are some real risks and problems that we should be aware of moving forward in the next, I'm going to say 12 to 24 months, as we sort of move into this kind of post-COVID world. So that's it for today, honestly. I think I'm supposed to say, if you like my stuff, throw it a like or a subscribe, and all that.